Joseph Haydn was one of the giants of the classical period. He taught Mozart and Beethoven and is famous for standardizing the form of the string quartet and the symphony. But what is it that Haydn is best remembered for?
Papa Haydn, he has, to me, the feeling of a truly great human being.
He was the Victor Borge of the 18th century because he'd be able to make you smile. So what he, I think, was able to do was to entertain his employer, which actually is a hard job to do if you think about it. He was a court jester, but in music.
While working in London, he noticed a particularly irritating trend among his after-dinner audiences. Many of them would nod off during the slower and quieter movements of his music. As revenge for their bad manners, he decided to teach them a lesson.
For them, he was writing background music, dinner music, essentially not the reason they were there primarily. They were there to socialize with each other. And so I think any serious artist would be irked a little when his music turned into wallpaper.
You want to fall asleep? Let's see if you can sleep through that. And he just played a huge chord in the middle of his slow movement. And I'm sure everybody just, wake up.
He loved musical jokes. He loved jokes of all kinds. He was a very clever, witty man. And I think that that wit is one of the identifying features of Haydn's music.
The piece is a perfect example of Haydn's mischievous character. And that's what Haydn was best remembered for by people who knew him. Unlike other famous composers who can be best described as brooding megalomaniacs, Haydn was pleasant and cheerful. Franz Joseph Haydn was born on March 31st, 1732 in Rohrau, a small peasant village in Austria near the border of Hungary.
You can see right from the beginning that it was impossible for him to grow up with aristocratic heirs. He was of the land, and they were country people. And I think that it was the genius that he had is not explicable in terms of his family background at all. It's just one of those great gifts that lands. But right from the beginning, his musical talent did exhibited itself, and that's one of the reasons why he wound up in the Vienna Boys Choir.
Possessing the voice of a nightingale, his teacher at St. Stephen's told him that a simple little operation could preserve it forever. Being spared the intimate details, Haydn was apparently all for it. hours before the surgery, his father found out and put a stop to it. Vienna might have lost a gifted soprano, but gained a future great composer. In 1759, Haydn performed his first symphony. Present in the audience was Hungary's most powerful prince, Miklós József Esterházy, a man who would change his life forever. The Esterházys were one of the richest families in Europe. They lived in opulent summer and winter residences that were the size of small countries. Hired by the prince as his royal court composer, Haydn had landed the ultimate plum job. He spent his days writing and performing grand concerts with his orchestra.
He had anywhere from 15 musicians to, 30 or 40, depending on the occasion, and they were at his disposal all the time. And he had to write at the request of the prince.
The count or prince or duke would say, well, next month we're having, we're having a big party at the castle, and you're going to compose for me 3 pieces that we can dance to, a couple overtures, and some background music for the next 2 hours. And then Haydn would set off and go and write some music.
Because he was so isolated, living out in the country with the Esterházys, he was forced to be original. Because he didn't have the influences of the big city Vienna around him or of the larger world. So the ideas that he came up with weren't ideas borrowed from other people. They were ideas that he had to come up with himself. And I think we owe the Esterházys a tremendous debt of gratitude for sticking him out there in their country residences, because there he could be, and was forced to be, himself.
Without Haydn, who knows what a symphony would sound like today? In Haydn's youth, a symphony structure had not yet been clearly defined.
The symphony in Baroque times was not, it wasn't clear, what the instrumentations should be, what the structure should be. I mean, there was more emphasis on, on dances and various styles or whatever. And Haydn sort of took that style and just made it more, I guess, easy to follow in a sense.
So what was the main thrust behind Haydn's 4-movement structure? Like many of the best ideas, it was simple: contrast.
What Haydn created was based on common sense. It really was. The four movements, all of which are contrasted.
The first movement.
It's just making people aware of by saying, this is my tune, now listen to it. Now, if you didn't get it the first time, I'll play it again. You play it the second time. Now, one tune isn't enough.
Fast section.
I'll give you another one. Now, listen to it. Now, you didn't quite get it? Okay, I'll play it again. Now, you've got 2 tunes which people recognize.
Ideas chucked around.
And that's what we call the development section. He takes little bits of this and little bits of that, throws it around and says, that's enough. I better go back to my main tune again.
Regurgitated.
So I'll play this again. That's enough. Let's just close it all up together, put a nice bow on it.
Finish.
After the roller coaster ride of the first movement, it's time to sit back and relax.
Second movement. A slow movement.
It's quite a contrast from the hectic pace of the first.
maybe what I'll do is just write a nice tune. And I play a nice tune, then I'll contrast it with another one, because most folk songs are like that anyway. And then I'll come back to my main tune again. That's done.
The third movement.
Now I need something which is lighter. So 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3.
Minuet and trio, a dance.
Gives me contrast, gives the audience a rest from what we've been doing so far.
And the fourth movement, finale.
Bright and lively, and shows off the orchestra's virtuosic prowess.
Usually a chance to play as many quick notes as you can in the shortest time available.
It'll sound busy, and everybody will listen, and we'll have fun with this. That's the basis of everything that he did. He wanted to make it easier for his listeners to understand what he was doing. But in so doing, he created this remarkable piece of music, which everybody then latched onto because it was such a perfect vehicle. And then every composer used that vehicle according to his own needs.
During the 30 years Haydn spent at Esterházy, not only did he create a great body of work, he took the various existing structures for string quartets and symphonies and single-handedly standardized them.
String quartet, as we now know it, is 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. Now, everybody would say, sure. But in fact, in Haydn's day, when he started writing his serenades, there wasn't a standardized format of the 4 instruments. Sometimes there would be 2 violas, sometimes there would be 2 cellos. It was a different thing. So he actually standardized that quartet in a way he standardized the symphony and wrote for that combination of instruments, and it seemed to work so well that other people started following suit.
Haydn wrote his first string quartet at the age of 28. He liked this combination of instruments so much, he wrote another 82 of them.
He was the first classical composer that came out of the Baroque era, and he introduced many, many things that Mozart then took to incredible heights.
During his years in Vienna, Haydn became aware of a young composer who was making quite a name for himself, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. To Haydn's credit, he immediately recognized Mozart's genius and helped to nurture it.
He told Mozart's dad that your son is the greatest composer that ever lived. And it takes a great man, because he was by that time in his 50s or 60s, I'm not sure, and he was talking about a teenager. That's wonderful.
Mozart read Haydn's scores before he met Haydn, I think that he saw the simple genius behind them, the originality in using standard forms and being able to make more out of them. He regarded Haydn as the greatest composer of the age.
Another famous student of Haydn's was Beethoven. Their relationship was unlike the mutual admiration Haydn and Mozart had for each other. It was more like all of Beethoven's relationships, stormy. Even though their temperaments did not harmonize, Beethoven learned much from Haydn, especially how to compose a symphony.
Can you imagine it, Haydn giving piano lessons to Beethoven? I mean, it's something that makes the mind boggle, but that's exactly what would have happened. He would have gone to him for perspective, for new ideas, for technical criticism, all of which Haydn would have been more than able to give, both as a pianist and as a composer.
Haydn was a late bloomer and did not start writing his 104 symphonies, 82 string quartets, 24 operas, 12 masses, and wealth of other orchestral music until he was 27. And it wasn't until he was in his 40s that critics began applying the term masterpiece to his work.
We owe Haydn a huge, huge debt of gratitude for what he did for the development of music. The string quartet is just a part of that. The symphonic form is the other part of it, you know. And if he hadn't done that, one would question what would actually would have happened to the course of music history as we now know it.
Haydn's symphonic structure had a huge impact on classical music. The symphony became the staple diet of the 19th century, with composer after composer adopting its form. But even though there was now an established standard, rules were made to be broken. Composers like Mozart and Beethoven would often make stylistic modifications to evoke different emotional reactions. Even Haydn himself mixed it up. His famous Farewell Symphony ends with a hush instead of a traditional fourth movement roar.
There's a story about his Farewell Symphony that in the course of this symphony, gradually, player by player, blows out the candle on his music stand and walks off.
I can imagine the king's or the duke's face where suddenly, oh my God, what's happening? What? What?
It was a nice, gentle reminder to his prince that the musicians wanted to be home with their families for the holidays. It's a very daring thing. The prince might have reacted negatively, but he got the hint. And the musicians got their time off to be with their families.
There was, I think, at one point a tendency to see his music as being superficial, flippant. I think the last 25 years there's been a significant change. And there are conductors who have really looked very carefully at the music of Haydn and suddenly realized that there is really much more substance in that music than was previously thought.
Haydn lived comfortably to the ripe old age of 77. Musicians and his friends called him Papa as a tribute of deep affection. Had Haydn died young like so many composers before and after him, it's unimaginable to think what the world and classical music would have lost.